Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid were two of the most notorious outlaws of the American Wild West, famed for their string of bank and train robberies in the 1890s and at the turn of the century. Butch Cassidy, born Robert Leroy Parker in 1866 in Utah, led the Wild Bunch gang and cultivated a reputation as a charismatic Robin Hood-like bandit. In fact, those who knew Cassidy described him as charismatic and generous, with a distaste for violence. His partner in crime, Harry Alonzo Longabaugh, better known as the Sundance Kid, was a Pennsylvania-born outlaw who earned his nickname after a stint in jail in Sundance, Wyoming. Together with the Wild Bunch, Cassidy and Sundance brazenly held up banks, stagecoaches, and trains across the Rocky Mountain states. These high-profile heists raised the profiles of the men to stratospheric heights. By the turn of the 20th century, facing intense pursuit by the Pinkerton Detective Agency and other lawmen, the pair decided that escape was the better part of valor. In 1901, Butch Cassidy, Sundance, and Sundance's gal pal Etta Place fled the United States for South America to evade capture. They initially tried to settle into an honest life, even homesteading a ranch in Argentina's Cholula Valley. But old habits died hard. By 1905, reports indicated that they returned to banditry, robbing banks and payroll transports in Argentina and Bolivia. Pinkerton agents had distributed wanted posters and warnings about the duo throughout South America, which kept pressure on the outlaws even abroad. By late 1908, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid's South American exploits appeared to catch up with them. According to conventional historical accounts, their story culminated in a remote Bolivian village after a robbery gone wrong. In early November 1908, two masked American bandits held up a courier from the Aramayo Franca Mining Company in southern Bolivia, stealing the company payroll. Bolivian authorities, alerted by descriptions of the culprits, pursued the bandits to the village of San Vicente. There, on the evening of November 6, 1908, a local cavalry patrol surrounded a small adobe house where two foreign suspects, believed to be Cassidy and Longabaugh, were holed up. As soldiers closed in, the cornered outlaws opened fire, cutting down one Bolivian soldier in the initial volley. A brief firefight ensued until darkness fell over San Vicente. What happened next in that Bolivian standoff is the stuff of legend. Villagers and the local mayor later testified that around 2 a.m., after the firefight had subsided, screams were heard from inside the house, followed by 2 shots. By morning, when authorities entered the hut, they found 2 bodies on the floor. The man thought to be the Sundance Kid was slumped against a wall with multiple bullet wounds and a shot to the forehead. The man presumed to be Cassidy lay next to him with a hole in his temple. The evidence suggested a grim narrative. Rather than be taken alive, Cassidy may have ended his mortally wounded friend and then deleted himself. This somber ending starkly contrasts with the famous 1969 film portrayal of a blaze of glory shootout, but it largely aligns with the contemporary Bolivian reports. However, crucially, no one conclusively identified the bodies in San Vicente as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid. The courier who had been robbed, Carlos Pero, was brought to view the corpses and claimed they were the same men who robbed him. Yet he had only seen the robbers' eyes under their bandanas and couldn't offer positive identification. No photographs were taken of the dead outlaws, and the 2 bodies were hastily buried in an unmarked grave in the local cemetery. The lack of definitive proof left an evidentiary void. Although descriptions of the deceased bandits roughly matched Cassidy and Longabaugh, the uncertainty meant that doubts and rumors began to creep in almost immediately. Did Butch and Sundance truly meet their end in Bolivia, or had they pulled off one final audacious escape? In the absence of absolute proof of Cassidy's and Sundance's demise, rumors of their survival took root and flourished. For decades after 1908, various eyewitness accounts and family testimonies fueled speculation that the two outlaws lived out quiet lives under assumed identities. Among the earliest and most persistent claims came from Cassidy's own family. His youngest sister, Lula Parker Bettinson, steadfastly maintained that her famous brother didn't perish in Bolivia. In her 1975 memoir, Butch Cassidy, My Brother, Lula recounted that Butch returned to the family ranch in Circleville, Utah, in 1925, 17 years after his supposed demise. Family members who were present recalled a middle-aged man with Cassidy's unmistakable grin arriving in a shiny new Ford automobile to pay a clandestine visit. According to Lula, during this reunion, Cassidy described his post-outlaw wanderings and even divulged how he and Sundance faked their ends. Cassidy claimed that an old friend, Percy Seibert, who worked at a Bolivian mine, had identified two bandits as Butch and Sundance to fool the authorities. If true, this story suggests that the notorious duo staged the San Vicente shootout narrative as a cover for their getaway. Lula Parker Bettinson further asserted that her brother lived out his remaining years quietly under an alias, supposedly in Washington state, and died of natural causes in 1937. As Lula put it, the family wanted to let the outlaw finally rest in peace away from the spotlight. Cassidy's alleged 1925 homecoming is far from the only eyewitness tale. In the American West, anecdotes of Butch Cassidy's post-1908 survival became a kind of folklore. Residents of Cassidy's old haunts in Utah and Wyoming swore they saw him in the 1930s, long after Bolivia. One Utah woman later recalled being introduced to a kind ranch guest, who her parents noted to be Butch Cassidy, well after the outlaw's supposed end. In Wyoming, a retired lawman named Jack Gomer claimed he shared a drink with Cassidy in 1930. Notably, he had met Cassidy during their respective careers. In another account, a former Wild Bunch member said Cassidy visited friends in the Wind River region of Wyoming in 1935. The most famous survival theory surrounding Butch Cassidy coalesced around the figure of William Phillips, an aging machinist in Spokane, Washington. In 1934, Phillips authored a mysterious manuscript titled The Bandit Invincible, a thinly veiled biography of Butch Cassidy that some have interpreted as Cassidy's own autobiography. Phillips, who died in 1937, never outright claimed to be Cassidy, but he dropped numerous hints and seemed to relish the speculation. In the 1970s, historian Larry Pointer publicized the Phillips theory, arguing that details in The Bandit Invincible were so precise that only the real Cassidy could have known them. Pointer and other researchers pointed to eerie similarities between Cassidy's known life and Phillips's story. For instance, the manuscript describes obscure events like a Wyoming prison warden offering Cassidy a handshake and pardon in 1895, which Cassidy refused. This is an incident corroborated by real prison records, which according to Pointer and others could only have been known by Butch Cassidy himself. They also noted that Phillips had married and settled in the U.S. just months after Cassidy's last known letter from Bolivia. Further, in the 1930s, Phillips allegedly confided his secret to close friends in Spokane. To believers, Phillips was Butch Cassidy living under an assumed name, and the manuscript was his way of telling his own tale. Skeptics, however, find the Phillips theory dubious. Investigative work eventually revealed that William Phillips was likely an ex-convict from Michigan who had crossed paths with Cassidy in prison in Wyoming. Some have speculated that Phillips may have borrowed Butch's legend to add luster to his own life story. Most scholars now consider Phillips an imposter who capitalized on the Cassidy mystique rather than the genuine article. Compared to Cassidy, Harry Longabaugh has fewer claimed post-1908 sightings, but he hasn't been immune to speculation. One elaborate theory put forward in the 2000s claimed that the Sundance Kid assumed the alias William Henry Long and lived out his days as a rancher in Utah. Researchers obtained permission to exhume Long's remains in 2008 in hopes of a DNA match to Sundance's relatives. The results, however, didn't deliver the confirmation they sought. DNA tests failed to link the exhumed bones to the Longabaugh family, coming back negative. More than a century later, the ultimate fate of Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid straddles the line between historical fact and folklore. On one hand, most historians trust the evidence that the two bandits died in Bolivia in 1908, as reported by the authorities at the time. The South American police archives unearthed by researchers included authentic letters written by Butch and Sundance from Argentina up to 1908. No verified records place Cassidy or Longabaugh alive beyond that date, and extensive investigations have yet to produce evidence proving their survival. Notably in the 1990s, a researcher attempted to recover the bodies of the two men in Bolivia. However, the DNA evidence didn't end up matching up with family members of the men, indicating that the researcher either found the wrong bodies or that other men were buried there. This is of course complicated by the fact that Butch and Sundance were buried in an unmarked grave. At present, there's no definitive proof that Butch and Sundance perished in Bolivia, but conversely conclusive evidence has never come out proving that they survived. What can be said with certainty is that the two outlaws dropped off the official historical record after November 1908. Whether this was because they perished in a firefight, as the official story goes, or because they took it as their opportunity to retire, remains an unsolved mystery. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy here. Just reminding you to hit that like button, subscribe, and also turn on all notifications. Also, don't forget to check out my Patreon and the YouTube membership. You can support for as little as $1 a month. On May 24, 1990, 30-year-old Paige Renkoski vanished under mysterious circumstances. Her case remains one of Michigan's longest-running and most notorious unsolved mysteries. Paige, a substitute teacher from Okemos, Michigan, spent that morning driving her mother to Detroit Metropolitan Airport and then visited a friend in Canton Township in the afternoon. Later that day, her 1986 Oldsmobile was found idling on the shoulder of Interstate 96 near Fowlerville with its lights on and driver's door unlocked. Inside the car were her shoes and purse, but Paige was nowhere to be found. The broad daylight disappearance baffled authorities and left her community shaken, marking the beginning of a decades-long search for answers. Witnesses recalled seeing Paige that afternoon on the I-96 roadside, speaking with one or two men beside a maroon minivan. She appeared upset, gesturing with her hands, while one man touched her shoulder as if trying to calm her. Sometime after this encounter, Paige vanished, and by 7:30 p.m., a passing motorist noticed her car still in the same spot and called police. Responding officers initially assumed it was an abandoned vehicle and had it towed, not yet realizing Paige was missing. Once her family reported that she hadn't returned, authorities processed the vehicle for clues. They found numerous fingerprints and a couple of palm prints on the car, but none matched anyone in police databases. There were no signs of a struggle in or around the vehicle, just Paige's personal belongings left behind in eerie fashion. Investigators quickly ruled out the idea that she left on her own. Paige was engaged to be married that fall and had left her bank funds untouched. Her fiancé and family were also cleared of any involvement, so attention turned to the puzzling question of who the unknown men on the highway were. With few leads, police appealed to the public for help. Within weeks, they erected 25 billboards along Michigan highways bearing Page's photo and a plea for information. Hundreds of tips came in over the years, but none led to Page. In subsequent years, various suspects were considered and eliminated. At one point, detectives even questioned a prison inmate whose crimes and timing seemed suspiciously close to Page's disappearance, but was eventually cleared. In 2009, a cold case team took a fresh look at the file. Investigators compiled composite sketches of possible suspects reportedly seen near Page's car and released them in 2011 to spur new information. That same year, teams even searched a pond and a rural farm property after an anonymous tip hinted at a burial site, but nothing was found. The consensus among law enforcement is that Page met with foul play, likely the victim of a chance encounter that turned violent. It's believed she stopped on the roadside either to help someone or because someone tricked her into pulling over. Her loved ones note that Page was kind-hearted and wouldn't hesitate to offer assistance if she saw someone in need. Notably, there were reports in that era of criminals impersonating police to flag down drivers, so one theory is that she may have been lured into stopping by someone posing as a cop. Whatever the exact circumstances, investigators suspect she was abducted by the individuals seen with her and likely harmed soon after. Some have wondered if her disappearance might be linked to other unsolved cases. One notable parallel is the 1989 abduction and slaying of Beverly Wivel in Canton, which bore striking similarities to Page's situation. Wivel's car was also found still running with her purse inside, and she had been in the same area Page visited that day. In 2025, authorities named Buster Robbins, the prime suspect in the Wivel case, as a person of interest in Page's disappearance. However, no definitive evidence publicly released has yet tied Robbins, or anyone else, to Page's fate. Notably, Robbins very clearly doesn't resemble the man or men seen with Page on the highway that day. Because of this, it's speculated that if Robbins was involved, he had the help of an accomplice. In the summer of 2006, a remote beach on Sakhalin Island became the stage for a maritime mystery. Sakhalin, Russia's largest island, located just north of Japan, seldom makes global headlines. But that year it offered up something truly strange. Locals discovered the remains of an unidentifiable creature washed ashore, a carcass so bizarre that it would soon be nicknamed the Sakhalin Island Sea Wolf. It was described as having dark gray skin, a shaggy coating of hair-like fibers, and an eerie, wolf-like face. Most importantly of all, unlike most cases of this nature, it came with ample photographic evidence. The creature's story began in August 2006, when a group of islanders stumbled upon a huge, decaying carcass on a Sakhalin beach. The carcass was estimated at about 20 feet long, though early reports exaggerated the size of the animal significantly. The head of the animal had a pronounced snout and a gaping jaw filled with teeth, giving it a ferocious, almost wolf-like face. One photo showed the skull clearly, jaws agape, leading some onlookers to compare it to a crocodile or a dinosaur. Uniquely, the creature's skin appeared to be covered in strands of coarse hair or fur about 5 centimeters long, an attribute virtually unheard of in large marine animals. It didn't take long for the internet and media to explode with speculation. The bizarre appearance of the carcass led people to propose all manner of identities. On cryptozoology forums, community members suggested everything from the plausible to the absurd. Some were convinced it was a plesiosaur or mosasaur, thinking a relic from the age of dinosaurs had somehow survived in the frigid and isolated Sea of Okhotsk. Others guessed it might be a large crocodile that wandered far from the tropics, or a species of shark whose corpse had morphed into an unfamiliar shape. Amid the initial flurry of excitement, cooler heads in the scientific community started weighing in. The photos, while dramatic, also offered clues that this sea wolf might not be so exotic after all. For one thing, the creature's mouth, with its teeth and skull shape, bore a resemblance to known toothed whales. Behind the scenes, scientists did examine the remains to the extent possible. Shortly after the carcass was found, a specialist from the local museum in Yuzhno-Sakhalinsk, Sakhalin's capital, was reportedly dispatched to the site. The bones and teeth were collected and analyzed, and the initial results were straightforward. This was a mammal. However, identifying the exact species from an incomplete, decomposed corpse was challenging. Some speculated that the creature was a beluga whale. Beluga whales are native to Arctic and subarctic waters, and there's a known population of belugas in the Sakhalin and Okhotsk Sea region. Adult male belugas can reach about 15 feet in length, which is right in the ballpark for the carcass's size. Critically, the skull and jaw structure of the Sakhalin carcass, as evident in the photographs, matches that of a beluga whale, which has a distinctive shape. This, of course, doesn't immediately resolve the issue of why the sea wolf appeared to have hair, but this question too is explained by the science on the matter. The hair was not true hair at all, but rather the fibrous remains of decomposed blubber and connective tissue clinging to the carcass. When large marine animals like whales decay, their muscle and fat can break down in a way that produces stringy fibers, giving the illusion of fur on a creature that had none in life. In the case of the Sakhalin carcass, it likely drifted at sea for some time, decomposing and shedding its more delicate parts, such as flippers and tail flukes, which could easily rot away. By the time it beached, the core body and skull remained, covered with hanging strands of decayed tissue that looked like matted hair. In short, the frightening sea wolf visage was the result of ordinary decay processes on a known species. Another early theory proposed for the Sakhalin Island sea wolf carcass is that it may have been a Baird's beaked whale. This large, elusive species inhabits the North Pacific and can reach lengths of over 35 feet, aligning with early estimates of the size of the carcass. Baird's beaked whales have elongated tubular bodies and prominent beaks, which could explain the creature's unusual skull and long jaw structure captured in photos. However, when it became clear that the creature was actually much smaller than initially thought, this theory fell to the wayside, especially given the shape of the sea wolf's skull. Despite the mystery being resolved in the years since 2006, the Sakhalin Island sea wolf has retained a relatively high degree of fame, but not as an unknown creature. In 2008, the creature received a massive boost to its profile through the inclusion in an SCP Foundation story, and continues to be very popular in that capacity till this day. In September 1997, two men testing a boat on Florida's Intracoastal Waterway came upon a grim sight, a body floating in the water. The male victim was bound with rope and weighed down. Yet investigators had no idea who the victim was, and for over 2 decades this man's identity remained unknown, turning the case ice cold. Only in 2023 would the truth finally emerge that the victim was Bruce MacPhail, a Canadian from the Winnipeg area. Sheriff's deputies recovered the body on September 10, 1997, near Flagler Beach, Florida. The circumstances were chilling. The man's hands and feet were tied, and autopsy findings showed he'd been eliminated execution style. Whoever ended him had tried to ensure the body would never resurface, tying it to weights under the water. Despite these efforts, the corpse was discovered, but identifying him proved impossible at the time. The victim had no identification on him, and the Florida heat and water had deteriorated most forensic clues. Fingerprints couldn't be obtained, and when police circulated a physical description of the middle-aged 5'8" white male, no missing person report matched the victim. Investigators even commissioned a clay facial reconstruction of the man, hoping someone might recognize his face. Despite this, no one came forward, and the case went cold as ice. By 2020, the mystery of the nameless victim was 23 years old. That year, Flagler County Sheriff Rick Stalley formed a dedicated cold case unit to tackle unsolved crimes. Detectives picked up the old case file and decided to apply new forensic techniques. In 2021, the team sent a sample of the victim's remains to Othram, a private forensic genetic genealogy laboratory. In August 2023, Sheriff Stalley announced that the unidentified victim had been positively identified as Bruce McPhail. Bruce McPhail was 58 years old when he was slain, and, as it turned out, he was originally from Kenora, Ontario, and had lived in Winnipeg, Manitoba. In the mid-1990s, he moved to Florida, drawn by the warm climate and his love of boating. How Bruce's path led him to Flagler County and into the clutches of a perpetrator remains unclear. Equipped with Bruce's identity, the cold case unit refocused the investigation. The sheriff pledged that with the victim identified, the team could concentrate on finding the person responsible. Was Bruce slain by someone he knew, perhaps a fellow boater or acquaintance? Or was he the random target of a violent robbery? The ferocity of the attack suggests a deeply personal rage or a desperate motive. So far, authorities have not publicly theorized on the motive, stressing that they need more information from witnesses or anyone who knew Bruce to fill in the blanks. On the morning of September 20th, 1987, joggers in Dana Point, California made a grim discovery. The body of a young woman lay at the base of a steep seaside cliff. Sheriff's deputies arrived to investigate the unidentified victim, a Caucasian woman in her 20s with no ID on her person. It was initially unclear whether she had fallen by accident, been pushed, or done it all on her own. With no name to call her, authorities referred to the mystery woman simply as the Dana Point Jane Doe, a case that haunted investigators for decades. At the top of the cliff, investigators found several personal items left behind by the young woman. A small purse sat near a half-finished soda can, alongside a pack of cigarettes and a road map of Southern California. Importantly, a phone number written on the map led investigators to a local taxi company. The cab driver remembered picking up a quiet young woman that morning and dropping her off near the Dana Point Cliffs, since she had only $18 for the fare. Further investigation pieced together the woman's last movements. Staff at a nearby motel recalled that the young woman had come in, asking if there were any tall hotels in the area. Notably, this stuck out to them since it was a somewhat unusual request. Why was this woman so concerned about the height of the building she was staying in? Shortly afterward, she was seen at a gas station, where she used the restroom and then called for a cab. She told the taxi driver that her car had broken down and asked to go toward Laguna Beach, or as far as her money would take her. The driver let her out on a coastal road near the cliffs, which was as far as he could take her for $18. That was the last time anyone saw her alive, as she walked off into the darkness toward the cliff's edge. At dawn, her body was found on the beach below. Investigators noted that her belongings, the soda can, cigarette pack, map, and a slip of paper with a hotel phone number were left neatly just beyond the fence at the cliff top. The evidence strongly suggested she had climbed over and jumped intentionally. The coroner eventually classified her death as likely of her own doing, while holding out hope that discovering her identity might explain what led to that tragic act. One perplexing clue was the small purse found at the scene. It contained no identification, but on the outside was a name embossed in gold: Carol Pinkham. Detectives traced that name to a woman in San Diego County who was alive and baffled to learn her stolen purse had turned up at such a scene. She explained that it had been taken from her in the mid-1970s, over a decade before the incident, and that she had no connection to the Jane Doe. How the victim came to possess that stolen purse has remained an unsolved side mystery to this day. Also, just thinking about it, it's kind of weird to think about the chain of causation from that person stealing a purse in the 1970s to that act being featured on a YouTube video a half-century later. With that lead hitting a dead end, investigators had nothing to go on but the Jane Doe's description and the circumstances of her death. For years, the Dana Point Jane Doe remained nameless despite efforts. She was a young white woman in her 20s, tall and slender with long light brown hair and brown eyes. In 1995, the popular series Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on the case, broadcasting the Jane Doe's composite sketch and details nationwide. Despite this massive signal boost, no one came forward with a name. Many years later, a breakthrough finally came from an unexpected source. Holly Glenn, a young woman from Whittier, had gone missing in 1987 around the same time as the Jane Doe was found. Decades later, high school friends searching for Holly stumbled upon the Dana Point Jane Doe case and noticed uncanny similarities. Suspecting the Jane Doe was Holly, they alerted authorities and missing person databases. By 2014, their campaign on social media prompted Orange County investigators to take a fresh look at the case. In early 2015, detectives collected DNA from Holly's relatives to compare with the Jane Doe's profile. In May 2015, nearly 28 years after the tragedy, the Orange County Sheriff's Department announced that the Dana Point Jane Doe was identified as Holly Glenn. DNA testing confirmed the match, giving a name to the victim at last. Holly had been only 21 when she died, and her family was finally able to learn her fate. The cold case mystery was solved. Holly had likely chosen to jump that night, with no foul play involved. Despite the case now being officially closed, some have speculated that the cab driver may have had some involvement in Holly's demise. After all, the circumstances under which he dropped her off are a bit unusual. That said, given that investigators found out that she was looking to find a tall hotel building, I support the official finding that this was likely an intentional act by Holly.